Hi, this is Tiffany Coral, Module 9 of AEP 855, When Ethics and Policy Collide, my case study. So to begin my case summary, some background knowledge on the case. The assistant principal in this case study at Rocket Junior High is Richard Inman. There are two students involved directly. James, who is a 15-year-old South Side group, heavily tattooed, muscular teenage boy. He has a past reputation for negative behavior. Um, Although recently, Richard Inman has been making attempts to get to know James more by staying after school and playing basketball with him. And recently, he has been improving his grades and staying out of physical altercations with others. The other boy in this scenario is David Ramos. He is, I would say, the complete opposite of James. He is an honor student, he's a standout trombonist, and he is described as a young scholar with a future ahead of him, a very bright future. In this case study, James is called to the office for having 3 tardies for the week. And in the process, the teacher sees James exchange a good with David. After the exchange, he seems a bit nervous, and the classroom teacher then reports it to Mr. Inman. Mr. Inman, he then involves the school police officer. He escorts the boys to the principal's office for a second time. That's James' second time for the day. And he questions the boys. James gives up little information through the questioning. But David, on the other hand, he does begin to cry and get very upset. The police officer then searches David, and he finds the brass knuckles, which are a prohibited weapon at the school district and against school district policy. Therefore, the police officer arrests both of the boys. In the process, James confesses that they are his brass knuckles, but the police officer, he insists that they both must be arrested because James was in the possession of them at the time. So they both then go to the juvenile detention center. So after they are arrested and taken, Mr. Inman then notifies both of the parents of the incident. James's mother, she is not surprised by the incident, and she basically says that she will let him sit there and think about his decision. While David's mother is very upset, she's distraught. She comes to the school right away and picks David up immediately from the detention center. Because of these actions, according to school board policy, Mr. Inman has to expel both of the boys. He does file the paperwork to expel James, but not for David. So James, he starts with the alternate education program, and David comes back to regular school. When David comes back to regular school, the director of secondary education calls Mr. Inman and says that he needs to file the paperwork to expel him. And at this time, he says that he doesn't feel that that's right. But the director of secondary education basically reassures him that that is according to school board policy and that's what he needs to do. So at this time, ethically, Mr. Inman doesn't know what the right decision is. Mr. Inman can face a public or an official reprimanding in his personal file if he does not follow through with the appropriate protocols. So Section 2 is on legal and ethical issues. At this point, James, David, and their families have all been harmed by the decision of Mr. Inman and the school police officer. The director of secondary education could also harm Mr. Inman for not filing the appropriate paperwork to expel David on these allegations. So the actions that have taken place do contravene an existing law. So basically, it's the law of the school. So the students did go against the school board policy. They also brought a prohibited weapon, which constitutes a felony offense. That's why they both were arrested. Based on this, the current school board policy is no less than 45 days in alternative education placement. There is no breach of contract at this time, but if Mr. Inman does not file the paperwork, there would be, because he is not following the school board policy, which is against his contract. The actions, I would say, are discriminatory against both James and David. I would say David mostly because this is David's first offense, although he was in possession of the brass knuckles. I would say against David as well, because although he did confess, he was not the one that did have the brass knuckles. So they both were reprimanded differently, but around the same situation, which was unfair to both of the students involved. And lastly, the school board policy, that action against James followed the school board policy, but it did not follow policy for David, because at this time he has not yet been expelled. Section 3 is to synthesize. David Ramos has falsely been convicted and penalized of a crime that could significantly impact his future if Mr. Inman follows through with expulsion in the disciplinary alternative education program, which is known as DAEP at this school. Section 4 is to synthesize the facts. So these are the people, places, and programs that are involved. The principal, Mr. Inman, he currently has only 1 year of experience. He has concerns regarding this current situation. I would say this is an ethical dilemma because he does not want to penalize David. The two students involved are David Ramos and James. They were the students that were involved in the incident. Their families are also involved because these actions affected them. The school police officer who arrested both boys and charged them with a felony, and also the director of the secondary education, which wants to continue through with the expulsion of David. Places, Rocket Junior High is where the incident occurred. Both boys were then taken to the youth detention facility. Programs. This type of school is not unknown, but I'm assuming it is a public school. It sounds like it's in an urban area, based on the fact that there's the south side. That sounds like there can be some gangs and violence that do occur there. Section 5, review and prioritize. So this situation is damaging to not only the reputation, but also the credibility of Mr. Inman, the relationship between Mr. Inman and David's family based on his actions, and also David's future. Relevant stakeholders in this situation, Mr. Inman has yet to finalize his decision on expelling David. That's where the ethical dilemma is taking place. At this time, all stakeholders do know about the situation and the incident that has occurred, but the final decision has yet to be made. The outcome of this decision affects the school district, the vice principal, the principal, other administrators, the director of secondary education, David Ramos and his family, especially the school board and future and current students if there is a school board policy change. Some unanswered questions that would have been available, if they were available, could have helped make the decision a little bit clearer is the school board liberal or conservative group overall? This would help you to decide if the board would be willing to change any of their board policies based on discipline. What is the district policy on first-time offenses and harassment? So because James did face multiple offenses, where David, this is his first offense, why are they being charged in the same way? How does the superintendent and other administrators think? What do they think of Mr. Inman's decision not to file the paperwork? What is the school district's police officer's history? Does he have a reputation of taking haste action like this in the past? How will the official reprimanding of Mr. Inman affect his future at the school and his job if he were to not go through with the expulsion? How would David's expulsion, how would that truly affect David's future? What is David's moral compass? an ethical stance on the issue, as well as what's Mr. Inman's moral compass, and his ethical stance on this issue a little further, a little more information there. And what is the director of secondary education's, what is her experience? Is she new? Has she done this for a long time? Section 6, these are my available options at this time. Action 1 is to take no further action, and there would be potential conflict with multiple stakeholders due to this. Action 2 is to completely disregard the director of secondary education, not discuss it any further, and do not file the paperwork. And Mr. Inman, he would face official reprimanding for that. Action 3, file the paperwork to expel David. This would drastically impact David's future and his family, and I don't think Mr. Inman would feel good doing that. Finally, action 4, that is to further discuss with the school board Mr. Inman's concerns and hopefully change board policy. Mr. Inman, he could still face official reprimanding if they do not agree with his stance and they do not follow any further guidance that they suggest doing. Action 5, it would be to meet with the Ramos family and discuss their options. Mr. Inman, he could face serious consequences for this and possibly even lose his job if the school did not know about this. Section 7 is to evaluate my options. So option 1 was to take no action. That would be the easiest option for the vice principal currently, but this could, again, potential conflict, and he could be reprimanded, and this is not, I would say, an ethically sound decision to make. Action 2 is to ignore the administrator, that director of secondary education. This option would meet the needs of David and the wishes of the vice principal, but it would be completely ignoring demands of your administrator, superior officer. Therefore, I believe that is not the ethical choice either. Action 3 is to concede. So this would be to just go along with what the director of secondary education is saying and to expel David. I would say that you're ignoring the needs of David and not doing the making an ethical decision there either. Action 4 is to discuss and hopefully compromise. This would potentially change board policy and help students in the future. At this time, I do think that is an ethical choice. And finally, action 5 would be to meet the needs of the Ramos family by taking no action further at the school, but helping the Ramos family. As a vice principal, personally, that would probably be a great choice, but because he is a public figure, this could be potentially harmful and would not necessarily guarantee justice for David. So the best option, Section 8, the best option for all stakeholders is to have further discussion and modifications of board policy with the approval of other administrators and the school board. This ensures that all students are treated fairly for first-time offenses. This is in reflection to the case of David Ramos to ensure that his future is not tarnished by one incident. So to implement the strategy, it would take further collaboration and modification of school board policy and their approval. This would ultimately ensure that all students are treated fairly, especially first-time offenders. So to do this, I would start by having a meeting with the superintendent and discuss my concerns and explain that expelling David would damage his future. He is an honor student. He is a standout musician, and this could definitely affect his schooling at a higher level. So eventually, hopefully, through discussions, you could come up with a manageable strategy to pitch to the school board to modify that current school board policy. Once you do come up with some for agreement with the superintendent, I would notify the Ramos family and communicate with them the changes that you are trying to implement. Once the school board does approve or disapprove of this, that we would let them know. So this small act of collaboration would hopefully start to